Caitlin Clark, 37 freaking points. 13 of 24, 8 3-pointers. Had the big double, 10 assists, 3 boards, and a steal. A monster game from Caitlin.
37 points, 10 assists, 8 threes. That stat line is ridiculous, but the numbers alone are not what made this game feel completely different from what Indiana had been showing lately.
Kelsey Mitchell, 30 points, 10 of 19. She hit 6 3-pointers. 4 assists. I mean, oh, watch out now. Watch out. She's dishing it a little. 2 rebounds. 2 steals and a block.
And then Kelsey Mitchell drops 30 beside her. That is the version of Indiana everybody has been waiting to see. Clark controlling the chaos, Mitchell attacking the openings, and neither player having to disappear for the other one to explode. But there was something else happening in this game that matters even more than the combined scoring. Watch how quickly Indiana was playing, because later we need to talk about why that pace may have exposed exactly what has been missing from this offense.
One of the most entertaining games in the first half of the year. Team actually played with some speed. Wasn't bogged down.
That is the first clue. Speed, not reckless basketball. Not just running because running looks exciting. Indiana was getting into actions before Chicago could completely load its defense, and Clark looked like she was playing instinctively instead of waiting for every possession to develop into a half-court wrestling match. That difference becomes enormous when your point guard can throw a pass 40 feet before most defenders even realize the window exists.
Lexie Hull, 26 minutes, 14 points, 6 of 8, 2 rebounds. Makayla Timpson, guys, she's really efficient. I got to tell you, I like this lineup. I like this lineup a lot. They could move. They had some legs. They didn't get tired. 12 points, 6 of 7, efficient, 9 rebounds.
And this is why the supporting performances deserve attention. Lexie Hull gave Indiana 14 points on 6 of 8 shooting in 26 minutes. Makayla Timpson finished with 12 points on 6 of 7 shooting and grabbed 9 rebounds. Those are not empty contributions sitting underneath 2 giant scoring performances. Those are exactly the kinds of efficient complementary games that make a Clark-Mitchell backcourt terrifying. Because when Clark has the basketball and the defense starts bending toward her, somebody else has to punish that decision. If Hull is converting the opportunities she gets, and Timpson is active around the rim, the defense suddenly has a problem with no clean answer. Stay home on everybody, and Clark gets more room. Send help at Clark, and Indiana starts finding cutters, shooters, and finishers, and Timpson adds another dimension because she can move. That matters with Clark. A mobile big does not need 20 post touches to affect the offense. Run the floor. Set the screen, roll hard, crash the glass. Be ready when Clark throws a pass into a space that did not look open half a second earlier. That style creates pressure without requiring Indiana to slow down and manufacture everything from a stationary half-court set. And that brings us to the matchup that turned the game from merely entertaining into personal.
Enes Kanter at the game right there. Dejanay Carrington getting burnt by Caitlin Clark.
That'll be the first personal.
Right here. Oh, Dejanay's mad. She's mad. She trying to do the Caitlin's flopping thing because if Dejanay's not showing her ass, she's not doing anything. Let's be real. She's not doing anything. Back down the court.
And a little bit of
Trying to bump Caitlin Clark right there.
There was clearly some edge between Caitlin Clark and Dejanay Carrington, and that is fine. Basketball is better when competitive matchups actually feel competitive. Carrington is a physical perimeter defender. She is not supposed to make Clark comfortable. Clark knows that. Everybody in the building knows that, but the interesting part is what happened when Clark refused to let that physicality determine how she played. Instead of shrinking the floor, she kept stretching it. That is one of the hardest things about guarding Clark when she gets confident. Conventional defensive geography starts breaking down. A defender can execute what normally would be a perfectly acceptable possession and still watch Clark rise from several feet behind the line. Then the next possession you have to pick her up farther away. Now there is more space behind you. Now a screen becomes harder to navigate. Now the roll opens. Now the passing lane opens. Now Mitchell has room on the weak side. One deep three does more than put 3 points on the scoreboard. With Clark, it can alter where the defense believes the possession actually begins. And once a defender starts thinking about the shot before Clark even crosses into normal shooting territory, Clark has already gained an advantage. That is why the matchup became such an important part of the night. It was not simply Clark scoring on Carrington. It was Clark forcing Chicago to defend her game instead of allowing Chicago to dictate the terms. And then she started doing this.
Right here, Caitlin Clark knocked it down right in Dejanay's face.
Clark, another step back three. Yes. And a little bit of passion afterwards. You love it.
And that's where the bump was.
That is the shot that changes the temperature. Step back, defender there, no hesitation, and then some emotion afterward. There is a massive difference between celebrating somebody being disrespected and appreciating genuine competitive tension. This was a basketball matchup with two players refusing to concede anything, and Clark answered the pressure with the most convincing response available, buckets. But notice what Indiana did not have to do. They did not have to spend possession after possession trying to force Clark into rhythm. She already had it. That sounds obvious, but it gets directly into the bigger debate surrounding this team. Clark is an unusual offensive player because rhythm changes what defenses are capable of doing against her. When she is touching the ball frequently, advancing it quickly, seeing the floor and getting opportunities to make decisions, every successful possession can feed the next one. The deep shot creates fear of the deep shot. The fear creates the drive. The drive creates help. The help creates the pass creates an open teammate, and once teammates start converting those opportunities, defenses cannot sell out as aggressively against Clark. That is an offensive ecosystem. It is not simply a superstar taking more shots, and Chicago found itself stuck inside it.
Caitlin Clark in traffic.
We play on.
That little pass over to Makayla Timpson, that was nice. That was real nice. Right here, let's go. Right here, step back, long three, boom, knocked it down.
That pass is almost as important as the three that follows in the clip, because this is where people can misunderstand what maximizing Clark actually means. It does not mean telling everybody else to stand around while she launches 30 shots. It means giving her enough control of the possession to make the defense answer questions. Can you stop the pull-up? Can you contain the drive? Can you handle the transition pass? Can your big defend in space? Can the weak side defender stay attached to the shooter while also seeing the roller? Can you survive when Clark gives the ball up and immediately relocates? Every one of those decisions puts stress on a defense, and if Indiana plays slowly, some of that advantage disappears because defenders get time to organize. They identify assignments, they communicate switches, they load toward the ball, they prepare for the screen. Playing faster reduces that preparation time. That does not mean Indiana should sprint into terrible shots. Pace and decision making are not opposites. The goal is to attack before the defense gets comfortable, and then, if the early opportunity is not there, flow into the next action without killing the possession. That is what made this game so encouraging. Indiana looked like it had options instead of instructions. There is a difference. An instruction says, run this action and reach this spot. An option says, read what the defense gives you and punish it. Clark is at her most dangerous in the second environment because processing the floor is one of her greatest weapons, and Kelsey Mitchell benefits enormously from that chaos. Mitchell does not need the entire offense constructed around her to become dangerous. Give her a rotating defense, a late closeout, or a defender scrambling back in transition, and she can attack immediately. So instead of asking whether Indiana belongs to Clark or Mitchell, the better question is why you would ever design an offense that forces you to choose. Their skill sets can create advantages for each other. And on this night, the scoreboard was showing exactly what happens when both are allowed to hunt.
Here, step back, long three, boom, knocked it down. Knocked it down. Let's go, 7th three-pointer of the game.
Clark goes for 30.
Boom. Knocked it down. Caitlin Clark she ate them up tonight.
There is the 7th three mentioned in the clip, and by that stage, the defense has a psychological problem as much as a tactical one. When somebody starts hitting from that distance repeatedly, defenders begin creeping forward. That sounds like the correct adjustment. Sometimes it is. But against Clark, every extra step toward half court increases the amount of territory behind the initial defender, and that is where the 10 assists become so important. Clark did not score 37 because she abandoned playmaking. She produced the double-double while scoring at that level. That combination is the nightmare. If a player is only looking to score, eventually you can send enough bodies at her and dare somebody else to make a decision. If she sees the second defender before the second defender arrives, trapping becomes much more dangerous. Now imagine being Chicago. You decide Clark has made enough threes, so you increase the pressure. She moves the basketball. Mitchell is already cooking. Hull is efficient. Timpson is finishing around the basket and attacking the glass. Where exactly is the safe place to send help from? That is why complementary production is not some side note. It is the mechanism that protects the superstar. The more Indiana's other players punish defensive attention, the more expensive it becomes to overload toward Clark. And once the defense hesitates, Clark gets the fraction of a second she needs. But this game had another storyline developing away from the actual basketball, and it eventually spilled into the stands.
As they're mad at Enes Kanter, by the way, he stood for the national anthem on the court tonight. Showing respect right there. I got to mute it because somebody might try to copyright it. But there he is, showing respect. Enes Kanter freedom. Good job. Good job. Out there sending a message.
Enes Kanter Freedom was in attendance, and the video shows him standing during the national anthem. The host also says he had come to support Sophie Cunningham. That became significant because his presence clearly generated a reaction in the arena. Whatever anybody thinks about Kanter Freedom politically or personally, there are two separate stories here, and they should not be mashed together just because emotions were high. One is the basketball game. The other is the confrontation surrounding a spectator who happened to be a former NBA player with a very public political profile. You can agree with him, disagree with him, cheer him, or criticize him. None of that changes what happened on the floor between Indiana and Chicago. And the reason that distinction matters is because the atmosphere was already heated enough without pretending every confrontation had one simple explanation. The crowd had opinions, players had opinions, Kanter Freedom's presence drew attention. Then Natasha Cloud became involved in an incident that the host highlighted. That is where this night became more than a box score.
Natasha Cloud crashed out on Enes Kanter Freedom, who was at the game. And for whatever reason, they kicked out Enes Kanter Freedom.
And right before the break,
Let's check it out right there. There's Natasha Cloud showing her ass, pointing. Oh, she's mad. Let's let more swinging dicks in the league. Right there. There she is. Showing her ass, center of attention. Me. The two biggest me players in the league are Natasha Cloud and Dejanay Carrington. They're both on the same damn team.
The footage shows Cloud pointing toward the stands while Kanter Freedom is eventually escorted away. The clip does not establish every word exchanged or every decision that led arena personnel to remove him, so it would be irresponsible to invent a complete story from a few seconds of video. What we can say is that the situation became visible enough to interrupt the normal atmosphere of the game, and Cloud was clearly animated during it. That matters because emotionally charged incidents can become completely different stories online within minutes. One side sees a player standing up for something, another sees unnecessary involvement with a spectator. One camera angle gets clipped, reposted, and captioned. Context disappears. Suddenly everybody is arguing about motives they cannot actually prove. So separate what is visible from what is assumed. Cloud reacted. Kanter Freedom was escorted out. The crowd was engaged with the situation. Anything beyond what the footage establishes needs evidence. And ironically, while all of that noise was growing around the court, Clark was producing the simplest argument of the entire night. She kept making basketball plays. That contrast is part of why this performance landed so hard. Chicago wanted the game to be physical and uncomfortable. The building had distractions. There was tension with Carrington. There was an incident involving Cloud and Kanter Freedom, and Clark never allowed any of that to become the defining basketball story. Her performance did. Now we can finally get to the bigger question this game raises about Indiana, because this is where the night becomes much more important than one hot shooting performance.
Natasha Cloud crashing out. That's hilarious. I guarantee you there will probably be 3 follow-up videos to this video tonight on the fallout from tonight, because there's no way in hell Natasha Cloud's not going to run her mouth. Dejanay Carrington probably run her mouth. Everybody will probably run their mouth. This was one of the funnest Fever games I've watched all year. Definitely in the top 3, I think. Caitlin Clark just went berserk.
The host calls it one of his favorite Fever games of the season, and I understand why, but the important question is not whether this was entertaining. The important question is whether Indiana learned anything from why it was entertaining, because this is the payoff. The biggest lesson from this game was not simply, Caitlin Clark needs to shoot more. That conclusion is too easy. The real lesson is that Indiana becomes incredibly difficult to contain when Clark is allowed to establish the geometry and tempo of the offense, while Mitchell attacks the advantages that creates. That is different from turning Mitchell into a passenger. Mitchell scored 30. Different from ignoring the front court. Timpson was extremely efficient. Different from telling Hull she only exists to defend. Hull gave them 14. Everybody can participate. The question is, what starts the chain reaction? And Clark has a rare ability to start it from places on the floor where most offenses are not even threatening yet. That is what Indiana has to protect. When the Fever become too deliberate, they are voluntarily shrinking one of Clark's biggest advantages, the amount of court she can weaponize. Think about the sequence. Clark brings the ball across quickly. A defender has to locate her several feet beyond the arc. A big has to decide how high to show on the screen. Weak side defenders are already checking cutters because Clark can fire a pass through tiny windows. Mitchell is moving against a defense whose attention is divided. That is not chaos for the sake of chaos. That is organized pressure. And once Clark makes a couple of deep shots, the pressure expands. Suddenly, Chicago is not guarding 24 feet of offense. It feels like 30. That extra space is where everybody else gets oxygen. This is why arguments over whether Clark should be the scorer or the facilitator miss what makes her special. She can force the defense to react before choosing which one she needs to become. If you go under, shoot. If you blitz, pass. If you switch a slower defender onto her, attack. If the defense collapses, find the perimeter. If nobody stops the ball in transition, keep going. That freedom is not selfish basketball. It is read and react basketball, built around a player whose reads can break a defense. And there is an important counter argument. You cannot expect 37 every night. 8 made threes is an extraordinary shooting performance. There will be games when those shots do not fall. There will be opponents with better personnel for switching. There will be nights when transition opportunities disappear and Indiana has to execute late in the shot clock. That is precisely why the lesson cannot be reduced to let Clark cook. The sustainable part is the process, not the shooting percentage. Give her repeated decision-making opportunities. Maintain movement around her. Run when the opportunity exists. Use mobile screeners. Let Mitchell attack tilted defenses. Make the opponent spend energy covering space. Then when the game inevitably slows down, Indiana has already forced the defense to reveal how it intends to guard them. That is something you can carry into another game even when the threes stop falling. And if Indiana can recreate that process consistently, then this performance becomes more than a highlight reel. It becomes a blueprint.
That was one of the funnest games of the year to watch. Caitlin Clark went absolutely berserk. Torched Dejanay Carrington. Torched her to death on the court. Kelsey Mitchell got some points in tonight. Ran up and down the court, especially in the first half. Nothing to bog this team down. Slow this team down tonight. They were running and gunning. Lexie Hull, best damn game of the year.
Listen carefully to the description there. Nothing bogging the team down, running and gunning, and Hull having one of her best games of the year. That is the thread connecting everything. The speed did not only benefit Clark, it created a version of Indiana where roles became simpler. Run, space, defend, rebound, cut when the defense turns its head, shoot when Clark or Mitchell creates the opening. There is less temptation to overcomplicate possessions when the first advantage appears early. And that matters for young or developing players because decisiveness is often easier when the defense is already reacting. Timpson does not have to become a traditional offensive hub. She can use her athleticism. Hull does not need to manufacture difficult isolation possessions. She can attack the opportunities that arrive naturally. Mitchell does not need to dribble the air out of the basketball searching for a shot. She can catch a defense mid-rotation and immediately become aggressive. Everybody's job gets cleaner. That is what a superstar is supposed to do for an offense, not collect every statistic. Make difficult basketball easier for everybody sharing the floor. Clark did that while still putting enormous scoring pressure on Chicago. And that is why this game should create a fascinating challenge for Indiana going forward. Because once you have shown everybody what the offense can look like at this tempo, you cannot pretend you have not seen it. Future opponents have now seen it too. They will adjust. Some will pick Clark up earlier, some will blitz, some will switch, some will try to deny the initial catch after she gives the ball up. Some will turn the game into a physical half-court battle and force Indiana to prove it can maintain the same principles when there are fewer transition possessions available. That is where coaching becomes critical. You do not preserve this version of Indiana by photocopying the exact same plays. You preserve the principles, space, tempo, decision-making, multiple threats, and most importantly, do not disconnect Clark from the action for long stretches and then expect her to instantly recreate the rhythm she had earlier. There is a balance between keeping everybody involved and removing your best advantage. This game showed what that balance can look like. Clark had her monster scoring night. Mitchell had hers. The supporting cast still contributed. Nobody had to be sacrificed. That is the part Indiana should be studying.
This was one of the funnest Fever games I've watched all year. Definitely in the top 3, I think. Caitlin Clark just went berserk. Just berserk. Kind of Caitlin Clark we want to watch right there. Peace, I'm out.
And that final reaction captures why the performance felt different. People did not just watch Caitlin Clark accumulate points. They watched the game bend around her. That is the version of Clark that made her such a phenomenon in the first place. The range gets the highlights, but the real attraction is the constant possibility that something can happen from almost anywhere on the floor. A 30-foot three, a transition laser, a sudden change of direction, a pass through traffic. Then Mitchell gets loose because 2 defenders were staring at Clark. Then a big gets a clean finish because somebody stepped toward Mitchell. One advantage creates another. That is what makes basketball addictive when it is played this way. And it also explains why the Carrington matchup mattered so much. Carrington brought the physical resistance. Clark answered with skill. That competitive friction elevated the game rather than defining it through controversy. The Cloud and Cantor Freedom incident will generate its own arguments, and people will choose sides based on far more than what happened during these 40 minutes of basketball. But Indiana's most useful takeaway has nothing to do with that. They found a style that made their best players look connected rather than crowded. Now they have to prove they understand why it worked, because one explosive game can be dismissed as a hot night. A second begins to look intentional. A third becomes an identity. And if this becomes Indiana's identity, opponents are going to face a brutal choice every possession: extend the defense toward Clark and expose everything behind it, or stay home and risk watching her pull from a distance most players would never consider. So now I want you to make the call. Was this simply one ridiculous Caitlin Clark shooting night against Chicago, or did Indiana finally show the offensive blueprint they should have been leaning into all along? And when the next game gets tight, should the Fever keep the ball in Clark's hands and live with the results, or go back to a slower, more controlled approach? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you want more Fever and WNBA breakdowns without ignoring the details behind the highlights, like the video and subscribe.